Marcus Chen had been working the asteroid mining platforms for 3 years when the Catharan Empire made first contact. Like most humans in the outer colonies, he learned about it through a crackling transmission that interrupted the usual mining reports. The message was simple. Humanity was no longer alone, and they were being invited to join something called the Galactic Council. What the transmission didn't mention was that humans would essentially become second-class citizens overnight. 6 months later, Marcus found himself on Cathara Prime, the sprawling capital world of an empire that spanned 12 star systems. He hadn't planned to leave the mining stations, but when your entire operation gets shut down because it violates ancient territorial claims that nobody bothered to mention during first contact, you adapt or starve. The Catharan city stretched endlessly in all directions, with towers that twisted into the purple sky like crystalline DNA strands. Flying vehicles moved in perfect geometric patterns between the structures, their movements controlled by citywide artificial intelligence that the Catharans claimed was more advanced than anything humans could comprehend. Marcus had to admit it was impressive, but he also noticed that every human he saw was either cleaning, carrying, or serving. He'd taken work at a transportation hub, managing cargo that moved between the Outer Rim colonies and the Empire's core worlds. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep him fed and housed in one of the human quarters. The quarters weren't bad, exactly, but they were clearly separate from where the Catharans lived, with lower ceilings and basic amenities that felt like an afterthought. The Catharans themselves were tall, slender beings with skin that shifted between deep blues and purples depending on their mood. They had 4 arms and eyes that could track multiple objects simultaneously. Most impressive was their natural telepathic ability, which allowed them to communicate complex ideas instantly among their own kind. They seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's reliance on verbal communication, often treating human speech as quaint but inefficient. Marcus was checking inventory manifests in the cargo bay when he first heard about the championship trials. 2 Catharan workers were discussing it in their musical language, their skin flickering with what he'd learned indicated excitement. He'd picked up enough of their language to understand they were talking about some kind of competition that happened every 5 years. "Excuse me," he said, approaching them carefully. Most Catharans were polite to humans, but it was always clear who was in charge. "Could you tell me about these trials you're discussing?" The larger of the 2 Catharans, whose name badge identified him as Zethkar, looked down at Marcus with an expression that might have been amusement. His skin shifted to a lighter blue. "You would not understand, human Marcus. The championship trials are for species capable of true excellence. It is a competition of mind, body, and spirit that determines who may serve as the Empire's champion." "What does the champion do?" "They represent the Empire's values and strength," the second Catharan, Velna, explained. "They settle disputes that cannot be resolved through normal means, defend the Empire's honor in challenges from other galactic powers, and serve as an example of what our civilization can achieve. It is the highest honor one can achieve." Marcus nodded, filing the information away. He'd learned that asking too many questions at once made the Catharans uncomfortable, so he returned to his work. But the idea stuck with him throughout the day. That evening, in the human quarters, he brought up the topic with Sarah Kim, one of the few other humans who'd managed to secure decent work. She was a translator, helping with communication between human workers and their Catharan supervisors. "I've heard of the championship trials," she said over their simple meal of synthesized proteins. "They happen every 5 years, and the winner becomes incredibly influential. But Marcus, no non-Catharan has ever even been allowed to participate, let alone win." "Why not?" "Because the Catharans believe they're naturally superior. They're not cruel about it, but they genuinely think other species lack the necessary capabilities. To them, we're like, well, Imagine if your pet dog wanted to become a surgeon. They'd be confused by the very idea. Marcus ate in silence, but his mind was racing. He'd seen enough of Catharan society to know that they valued excellence above almost everything else. Their entire social structure was built around merit and achievement. If someone could prove they deserved respect, the Catharans would give it. The next day, he requested a meeting with Supervisor Kethrall, the Catharan who oversaw the transportation hub. Getting a formal meeting with a supervisor was unusual for a human worker, but Marcus had established himself as reliable and competent, so his request was granted. Kethrall's office was a perfect example of Catharan aesthetics. Clean lines, crystalline surfaces, and soft lighting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The supervisor himself was older than most Catharans Marcus had met, his skin a deeper purple that indicated both age and wisdom in their culture. "Human Marcus," Kethrall said, settling into his chair with fluid grace. "You requested this meeting to discuss a work-related matter?" "Actually, sir, I wanted to ask about the championship trials." Kethrall's skin flickered with what Marcus had learned was surprise. "An unusual topic for a cargo supervisor. What is your interest?" Marcus took a breath. He'd been preparing for this conversation for days. "I'd like to know if it's possible for a human to participate." The silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to worry he'd overstepped some cultural boundary. Finally, Kethrall's skin shifted to a pattern Marcus didn't recognize. "Human Marcus, I must ask why you would consider such a thing. The championship trials are not merely difficult. They are designed to test capabilities that your species has never demonstrated. Physical challenges that would break human bones, mental puzzles that require cognitive abilities your people lack, and spiritual trials that demand a connection to the universe that humans simply do not possess. With respect, sir, how do you know humans lack these abilities if none of us have ever been tested?" Another long pause. Kethrall's 4 hands moved in complex patterns while he thought, a habit Marcus had noticed among Catharans when they were processing something unexpected. "The trials consist of 3 phases," Kethrall said finally. "The trial of strength, which tests physical capability and endurance. The trial of mind, which challenges cognitive function and problem-solving under extreme pressure. And the trial of spirit, which—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "It is difficult to explain in your language. It tests one's connection to the deeper currents of existence, their ability to understand and influence the fundamental forces that bind all life. And you believe humans are incapable of any of these? Not incapable, perhaps, but insufficient. The current champion, Valtek the Wise, completed trials that would kill most beings. He lifted weights that would crush a human, solved mathematical proofs that take most of our people decades to understand, and demonstrated a spiritual connection so profound that he could influence the behavior of quantum particles through focused intention alone." Marcus nodded slowly. "But the trials are open to anyone who wishes to attempt them?" "Technically, yes. Any sentient being within the Empire may request to participate. But Marcus Human, you must understand. Failure in the trials is not merely losing a competition. The challenges are designed to push participants to their absolute limits. Many do not survive the attempt." "I understand the risks, sir. But I'd still like to formally request participation in the next championship trials." Kethrall stared at him for a long moment, his skin cycling through several color patterns Marcus couldn't interpret. Finally, he reached for a communication device. "I will need to discuss this with the Council of Elders. This is not a decision I can make alone. Return to your duties, and I will contact you when we have an answer." Marcus left the office knowing he'd probably just made either the best or worst decision of his life. 3 days later, he was summoned back to Kethrall's office. This time, the supervisor wasn't alone. Two other Catharans sat in chairs that had been brought in specifically for the meeting. Marcus recognized one of them from broadcasts, Elder Silvera, one of the most influential members of the council. "Human Marcus," Elder Silvera said, her voice carrying the musical quality that indicated she was speaking with the full authority of her office. "Your request has created quite a discussion among the council. Some believe it is pointless to allow a human to attempt trials designed for more advanced species. Others find it curious that one of your kind would even make such a request. And what do you believe, Elder?" "I believe that the Empire is built on merit, not assumption. If you wish to attempt the trials, you may do so. However, I want you to understand what you are requesting. The trials will begin in 4 months. During that time, you will be expected to prepare yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. You will be given access to training facilities and educational resources, but the responsibility for your preparation lies entirely with you." She leaned forward. Her forearms moving in what Marcus had learned was a gesture of serious emphasis. "More importantly, if you fail, and the statistical probability of your success is effectively 0, you will not be permitted to request participation again. This is a one-time opportunity, and failure will be seen as proof that humans are not yet ready for true citizenship in the Empire." Marcus felt the weight of her words. This wasn't just about him anymore. If he failed, it would confirm every assumption the Catharans had about human limitations. If he succeeded, "I understand, Elder, and I accept those conditions." Elder Silvera's skin shifted to a pattern that seemed almost like approval. "Very well. Supervisor Kethrall will provide you with the necessary resources. Training begins tomorrow." As Marcus left the office for the second time, he caught a glimpse of something in Kethrall's expression that he hadn't expected. Hope. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. For the first time since arriving on Cathera Prime, Marcus wondered if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one who thought humans deserved better than they'd been getting. The training facility was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The main chamber was enormous, with sections dedicated to different types of physical conditioning. There were weights that seemed to adjust their mass based on the user's capabilities, obstacle courses that reconfigured themselves automatically, and training areas where gravity itself could be modified. His first trainer was a young Catharan named Dexhal, who specialized in physical conditioning for the trials. Dexhal was polite but clearly skeptical. "We will start with basic assessments," Dexhal explained, leading Marcus to a testing area. "I need to understand your current capabilities before we can design a training regimen." The tests were humbling. Marcus discovered that his human strength was about 30% of what an average Catharan could achieve. His endurance was better proportionally, but still fell short of Catharan standards. His reaction time was surprisingly competitive, which seemed to puzzle Dexhal. "Your reflexes are quite good," the trainer admitted. "Better than I expected. This may be useful in the trial of strength, which is not purely about raw power, but also about adaptation and quick thinking." Over the following weeks, Marcus pushed his body harder than he ever had in the asteroid mines. The training was brutal, but he began to notice improvements. More importantly, he started to understand how the trials worked. They weren't just tests of absolute capability. They were designed to challenge participants in ways that revealed character and determination as much as raw skill. The mental training was handled by Vextara, an elderly Catharan who specialized in cognitive enhancement. She was less skeptical than Dexhal, but no less demanding. "Human minds work differently than ours," she told him during their first session. "You think linearly while we process multiple thought streams simultaneously. This is usually considered a limitation, but it may actually be an advantage in certain types of problems." The mental exercises were exhausting in a completely different way than physical training. Marcus spent hours working through logic puzzles that seemed impossible. Mathematical proofs that required thinking in dimensions he could barely visualize, and memory exercises that pushed his recall abilities to their limits. But the most challenging part of his training was the spiritual preparation, overseen by Zenkara, a Catharan mystic whose skin maintained a constant state of shifting, flowing patterns that were hypnotic to watch. "Humans have souls," Zenkara said during their first meeting. "But you have lost the ability to perceive them clearly. Your species became focused on the physical world and forgot how to sense the deeper connections that bind all existence." The spiritual training involved meditation techniques that were foreign to anything Marcus had experienced, exercises designed to heighten his awareness of what the Catharans called the flow, the underlying energy that connected all living things. At first, Marcus felt nothing but frustration, but gradually, over weeks of practice, he began to sense something. It was subtle, like a whisper at the edge of hearing, but it was real. "You are beginning to understand," Zenkara told him after a particularly intense session. "Your connection is different from ours, but it exists. This may serve you well in the trial of spirit." As the months passed, word of Marcus's training spread throughout Cathara Prime. Many Catharans viewed it with amusement or curiosity, but Marcus noticed that some seemed genuinely interested in his progress. A few even began attending his training sessions as observers. One of these observers was someone Marcus hadn't expected, Princess Lyra Andiel, the Emperor's daughter and one of the most respected young Catharans in the Empire. She appeared one day during his physical training, watching silently as he worked through a complex obstacle course. After the session, she approached him directly, something that was unusual in Catharan culture. Normally, someone of her status would communicate through intermediaries. "Human Marcus," she said, her voice carrying the complex harmonics that indicated she was speaking formally. "I have been watching your preparation with interest. I'm honored by your attention, Princess. I wanted to speak with you because your participation in the trials has created discussion among my people. Some see it as entertainment, others as folly. But a few of us see it as something more significant." She paused. Her skin shifting to patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. "Tell me, what do you hope to achieve if you succeed in the trials?" It was a question Marcus had asked himself many times during training. "I want to prove that humans deserve to be true partners in the Empire, not just workers and servants. I want to show that we have value beyond what you've seen so far. And if you fail, then I fail knowing I gave everything I had to the attempt." Princess Lyra Andiel studied him for a long moment. "There is something you should know, Marcus Human. The trials are not merely about individual achievement. The champion serves as a bridge between the Emperor and the people, helping to guide decisions that affect the entire empire. If you were to succeed, you would not just be representing human capabilities. You would be representing human values and perspectives in the highest levels of imperial government." "I understand the responsibility, Princess." "I hope you do," she said quietly, "because there are forces within the Empire who would not welcome such a change. Your success would challenge assumptions that many Catharans hold dear. Be prepared for more than just physical and mental challenges." With that warning, she left. But her words stayed with Marcus throughout the remaining weeks of preparation. The final month before the trials was the most intense yet. Marcus's trainers pushed him harder than ever, but he could see their attitudes had changed. Dexhal no longer seemed skeptical. He seemed determined to give Marcus every possible advantage. Vextara spent extra hours helping him refine his problem-solving techniques. Even Zenkara, usually serene and detached, showed signs of investment in his success. "You have exceeded our expectations, Human Marcus," Supervisor Kethral told him during their final preparation meeting. "Whether you succeed or fail in the trials, you have already proven something important about your species." "What's that, sir?" that when humans commit to something truly important, they bring a determination that is remarkable. We Catharans value excellence, but perhaps we have underestimated the power of sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. 3 days before the trials were scheduled to begin, Marcus received an unexpected visitor in his quarters. Sarah Kim arrived, looking nervous and excited. "Marcus, something amazing has happened," she said, sitting across from him in the small common area. "Do you remember how you said no one else seemed interested in challenging the way things are?" "Yes." "Well, you were wrong. Word of your training has spread beyond Cathara Prime. I've been receiving messages from humans throughout the Empire. They're inspired. Some are asking about participating in future trials. Others are requesting better working conditions or educational opportunities. Your attempt is making other humans believe they deserve more." Marcus felt a mix of pride and terror. That's wonderful. But it also means the pressure is even higher. If you fail, you'll have still accomplished something nobody thought was possible. You've made humans visible in a way we never have been before. "But Marcus," Sarah smiled, "I don't think you're going to fail." The night before the trials, Marcus sat in his quarters, reviewing everything he'd learned over the past 4 months. His body was stronger and more capable than it had ever been. His mind was sharper, able to process complex problems with speed and accuracy that surprised even him. And his spirit. He could feel the flow now, that subtle energy that connected all things. It was different from how the Catharans described their connection, more intuitive than analytical, but it was real. Tomorrow, he would face challenges designed to push him beyond what anyone thought a human could endure. He would be tested in ways that might break him physically, mentally, and spiritually. But he would face those challenges with 4 months of preparation, the support of trainers who had come to believe in him, and the hopes of every human in the Empire. As he prepared for sleep, Marcus thought about Princess Lyra Andiel's warning about forces that would oppose his success. He thought about Elder Silvera's statement that his failure would be taken as proof of human limitations. He thought about Sarah's news that humans throughout the Empire were watching and hoping. Tomorrow would either mark the beginning of a new era for humanity and the galactic community, or confirm every prejudice the Catharans held about human inadequacy. Either way, the arena where the championship trials took place was a marvel of Catharan engineering. Built into a natural canyon on Cathara Prime, it could accommodate 50,000 spectators while providing multiple environments for different types of challenges. As Marcus walked onto the main floor, he could feel the weight of all those eyes watching him. The turnout was larger than anyone had expected. Word of the human challenger had spread throughout the Empire, and beings from dozens of different species had traveled to witness what many considered either a historic moment or an amusing spectacle. Marcus tried not to think about which category most of them expected this to fall into. 5 other participants stood on the arena floor with him. All were Catharans, ranging from young warriors seeking to prove themselves to seasoned champions looking to claim the ultimate prize. Marcus recognized one of them, Velthak the Strong, the previous champion from 10 years ago who was attempting to reclaim his title. Velthak was massive even by Catharan standards, and when he looked at Marcus, his skin showed the patterns that indicated polite dismissal. The current champion, Valthek the Wise, stood on a raised platform above the arena floor. He was smaller than most Catharans, but carried himself with the quiet confidence that came from 5 years of being considered the pinnacle of imperial achievement. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly throughout the arena without technological amplification, a demonstration of the spiritual mastery that had helped him win his title. "Participants in the championship trials," Valthek announced, "you stand here today to test yourselves against challenges that will reveal the depths of your capabilities. These trials are not merely competitions. They are transformations. You will either emerge greater than you entered, or you will not emerge at all. Marcus felt a chill at those words, but he also felt something else. Excitement. For the first time since arriving in Catharan space, he was being given a chance to show what he could really do. The trial of strength begins now, Val Thek continued. Each participant will face 3 challenges: the test of raw power, the test of endurance, and the test of adaptive combat. You may attempt these in any order you choose, but all must be completed before sunset. Failure in any test eliminates you from the trials entirely. The test of raw power was held in a section of the arena where ancient Catharan artifacts had been embedded into the walls. The challenge seemed simple: lift a series of weights that increased in mass until the participant could no longer continue. But Marcus had learned during his training that this test was more complex than it appeared. The weights were psychically active, designed to grow heavier as they sensed doubt or fear in the lifter. A participant with absolute confidence might find them surprisingly manageable, while someone wrestling with uncertainty could discover that the weights became impossibly heavy even at lower levels. Marcus watched the other participants attempt the challenge first. Velthak approached it with brute force, his 4 arms working in perfect coordination as he lifted weights that would have crushed a human instantly. But Marcus noticed something. As the weights grew heavier, Velthak's movements became slightly strained, not from physical effort but from mental pressure. The former champion was fighting doubt about whether he could reclaim his former glory. When Marcus's turn came, the arena grew quiet. He approached the first weight, a crystalline block that probably massed twice what he did, and placed his hands on its surface. Instead of trying to overpower it, he did something his trainers had taught him. He accepted what he was. He was human. He was smaller and weaker than everyone else here. But he had trained for 4 months with determination that had impressed even his Catharan instructors. He had nothing to prove to himself because he already knew exactly what he was capable of. The weight lifted easily. The crowd murmured in surprise. Marcus moved to the second weight, then the third, each time maintaining the same mental state, complete acceptance of his capabilities and limitations. He wasn't trying to be Catharan. He was trying to be the best possible version of himself. He made it to the 8th weight before his physical strength finally gave out, placing him 3rd among the 6 participants. It wasn't the best performance, but it was respectable, and the way the crowd reacted suggested they hadn't expected him to lift anything at all. The test of endurance took place in a different section of the arena, where participants had to navigate an obstacle course that adapted itself to their performance. The course started simple but grew increasingly complex, adding new challenges as previous ones were mastered. The test continued until the participant was unable to progress further. This was where Marcus's human physiology gave him an unexpected advantage. Catharans were stronger and faster than humans, but their endurance was different. They could maintain peak performance for impressive bursts, but struggled with the kind of prolonged, steady effort that humans had evolved for. The course began with basic climbing and jumping challenges. Marcus moved through these efficiently, not trying to match the speed of the Catharan participants, but maintaining a pace he could sustain. As the challenges grew more complex, requiring precise timing and multiple attempts to master, he noticed that several of his competitors were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Velthak, who had dominated the strength test, was struggling with a section that required dozens of precise timing jumps in sequence. His natural speed worked against him here as he kept overshooting targets and having to restart. Marcus approached the same section more methodically, taking time to observe the pattern before attempting each sequence. The course continued for hours. One by one, the other participants reached their limits and were eliminated from this portion of the trial. Marcus found himself in an almost meditative state, moving through increasingly complex challenges with steady determination rather than explosive effort. When the sun reached its zenith, Only Marcus and one other participant remained in the endurance test. Kethmira the Swift, a young Ketharan warrior known for her agility. She was clearly more skilled than Marcus, but she was also showing signs of exhaustion that Marcus didn't feel yet. The final section of the course required participants to cross a gap using only a series of floating platforms that moved in complex, unpredictable patterns. Kethmira attempted it 3 times, each failure draining more of her energy. On her 4th attempt, she miscalculated a jump and fell, eliminating her from the trial entirely. Marcus studied the platforms for several minutes before attempting his crossing. He'd noticed that while the platforms moved unpredictably, they followed a pattern based on the participants' approach. The key was not to fight the pattern, but to work with it. He made his crossing slowly and carefully, adapting his route as the platform shifted. When he reached the other side, the arena erupted in surprised applause. He had won the endurance test outright. The test of adaptive combat was held in the evening, under artificial lights that created dramatic shadows throughout the arena. Each participant faced a series of opponents, not other participants, but holographic constructs that adapted their fighting style based on the challenger's approach. Marcus had been dreading this test the most. Combat training had been part of his preparation, but 4 months wasn't enough to match beings who had been training for decades. However, his instructor had taught him something valuable. The test wasn't about winning fights, but about demonstrating adaptability and tactical thinking under pressure. The first opponent was a straightforward warrior construct, strong and fast, but predictable. Marcus used mobility and terrain to his advantage, avoiding direct confrontation while wearing the construct down. It took longer than the Catharan participants needed, but he eventually succeeded. The second opponent adapted to his evasive tactics, becoming faster and more aggressive. Marcus switched strategies, using defensive techniques and counterattacks rather than avoidance. The crowd seemed engaged by his ability to change approaches mid-fight. By the 4th opponent, Marcus was facing a construct that had analyzed his previous battles and adapted to counter his preferred tactics. This was where the test became truly challenging. Participants needed to discover new approaches on the fly, drawing on reserves of creativity and determination they might not have known they possessed. Marcus found himself thinking not like a warrior, but like an asteroid miner. In the mining fields, you constantly faced problems that required improvised solutions with limited resources. When the construct pressed him into a corner, he used the environment in ways that weren't traditional combat techniques but were effective nonetheless. He made it through 6 opponents before finally being overwhelmed by a construct that could counter every approach he attempted. It was a respectable showing, though not as impressive as his endurance performance. As the first day of trials concluded, Marcus was surprised to find himself still in the competition. 2 participants had been eliminated during the strength trials, and 1 more during the adaptive combat test. Marcus, Velthak the Strong, and 2 others, Silketh the Brilliant and Zarvex the Wise, remained. The second day would bring the trial of mind, and Marcus knew this was where his human thinking patterns would face their greatest test. Catharan minds could process multiple complex concepts simultaneously in ways that human brains simply couldn't match. But Vexitara had taught him that sometimes linear thinking could find solutions that parallel processing missed. The trial of mind began before dawn, in a section of the arena that had been configured to look like a vast library. The participants were presented with 3 challenges: the logic maze, the proof of understanding, and the test of innovation. The logic maze was exactly what it sounded like: a 3-dimensional puzzle that required participants to navigate through a complex series of logical problems to find their way out. The maze adapted to each participant, becoming more complex as they demonstrated greater capability. Marcus watched Silketh the Brilliant enter the maze first. She was known throughout the Empire for her intellectual achievements, and Marcus could see why. She moved through the initial challenges with fluid ease, her mind processing multiple logical streams simultaneously. But as the maze grew more complex, Marcus noticed something interesting. Her parallel processing approach sometimes caused her to overlook simpler solutions because she was considering too many possibilities at once. When Marcus entered the maze, he took a completely different approach. Instead of trying to solve multiple paths simultaneously, he focused on one route at a time, following each logical chain to its conclusion before moving on to the next. It was slower initially, but as the maze grew more complex, his methodical approach began to pay dividends. The maze seemed to recognize that he thought differently and adapted accordingly, presenting him with challenges that required sustained focus and step-by-step reasoning rather than parallel processing. Marcus found himself in a state of deep concentration, working through problems that would have been impossible for him to solve when he first arrived on Cathara Prime. He emerged from the maze third, behind Silketh and Zarvex, but ahead of Velthak, who had struggled with the purely intellectual challenges. The proof of understanding required participants to demonstrate mastery of a complex mathematical concept by deriving it from first principles, then applying it to solve a practical problem. The concepts were drawn from advanced Catharan mathematics that dealt with multidimensional physics and the mathematical foundations of their faster-than-light travel technology. This was where Marcus expected to fail completely. The mathematics involved were beyond anything humans had yet achieved, requiring conceptual frameworks that his species hadn't developed. But Vexitara had prepared him for this possibility. "If you cannot understand their mathematics," she had told him, "then find a way to solve their problems using your own methods." The problem presented to Marcus involved calculating hyperspace trajectories for efficient travel between star systems. The traditional Catharan approach required advanced multidimensional calculus that Marcus simply couldn't perform. But as he studied the problem, he realized it was fundamentally about optimization, finding the most efficient path through a complex space. In the asteroid mining fields, Marcus had developed intuitive approaches to similar optimization problems, though in much simpler contexts. He began applying those same principles, using approximation methods and iterative approaches that didn't require the sophisticated mathematics the Catharans used. His solution was inelegant by Catharan standards, but it worked. More importantly, it was arrived at by a completely different mental path than anything the other participants had used. The judges seemed as puzzled as they were impressed. The final challenge of the trial of mind was the test of innovation, where participants were given a practical problem and asked to devise a novel solution. The problem was how to establish communication with a newly discovered species that showed signs of intelligence but used completely unfamiliar methods of information exchange. The other participants approached this with sophisticated technological solutions, drawing on advanced Catharan science and their telepathic abilities. Marcus took a different approach entirely. He thought about first contact between humans and Catharans, and how many misunderstandings had occurred despite both species being technologically advanced. He proposed a solution based on gradual relationship building through shared activities and pattern recognition rather than direct communication attempts. His proposal was to establish parallel activities, both species working on similar tasks inside of each other, allowing natural patterns of cooperation and problem-solving to emerge. It was less technologically sophisticated than the other proposals, but the judges seemed intrigued by its psychological insight. When the trial of mind concluded, Marcus was amazed to find himself still in second place overall. Silketh the Brilliant led the competition, but Marcus was ahead of both Velthak and Zarvex. The crowd's reaction had shifted from amusement to genuine engagement. They were beginning to see him not as a curiosity, but as a legitimate participant. The final day would bring the trial of spirit, and Marcus knew this would be his greatest challenge yet. The Catharans' natural telepathic abilities gave them an intuitive connection to what they called the flow that humans could barely perceive. But Zenkara had taught him that human spiritual awareness was different, not necessarily inferior. The trial of spirit began at dawn on the third day, in a section of the arena that had been transformed into something resembling a natural environment. Trees, water, and living creatures had been brought in to create a space that felt alive in ways the rest of the arena didn't. The first test was the meditation of clarity, where participants had to maintain perfect mental stillness while subjected to increasingly intense distractions. Catharan telepaths excelled at this, able to compartmentalize their thoughts in ways that allowed them to ignore external stimuli. Marcus found this test surprisingly manageable. His months of training with Zenkara had taught him meditation techniques adapted for human neurology. While he couldn't match the Catharan's natural telepathic shielding, he had learned to achieve a different kind of mental stillness, one based on acceptance rather than resistance. As chaotic sounds, lights, and even telepathic interference assaulted the participants, Marcus maintained his calm by embracing the chaos rather than fighting it. He let the distractions flow through his consciousness without engaging with them, achieving a state of serene awareness that surprised the judges. The second test was the challenge of connection, where participants had to demonstrate their ability to perceive and interact with the flow, the underlying energy that connected all living things. This was where Marcus expected his human limitations to become insurmountable. The other participants approached this test with confidence, their natural telepathic abilities allowing them to sense and manipulate the flow with visible results. They could influence the behavior of small creatures in the arena, accelerate the growth of plants, and even generate localized energy fields. When Marcus's turn came, he closed his eyes and reached out with senses that months of training had barely awakened. He couldn't perceive the flow the way Catharans did, as a network of energy that could be directly manipulated. Instead, he felt something subtler, patterns of connection and relationship, the way all living things influenced and were influenced by each other. He approached a small tree that had been planted for the test and placed his hands on its bark. Instead of trying to force energy into it the way the Catharans had, he simply listened. He felt the tree's needs, its connections to the soil and air around it, the way it existed as part of a larger web of life. Marcus began to hum, a low, wordless melody that seemed to emerge from his understanding of the tree's place in that web. It wasn't telepathy or energy manipulation, but something more intuitive, an expression of harmony with the natural systems around him. The tree responded, not with the dramatic growth the Catharans had achieved, but with something subtler. Its leaves turned slightly to catch light more efficiently, its root systems shifted to better access nutrients, and somehow the entire area around it seemed more balanced. The judges conferred for a long time after Marcus's demonstration. When they announced the results, they seemed almost confused by their own decision. Marcus had achieved connection with the flow, but through methods so different from traditional Catharan approaches that they struggled to evaluate it. The final test of the trial of spirit was the most challenging: the vision of truth. Participants were required to demonstrate their understanding of the fundamental nature of existence itself, sharing a vision or insight that revealed deep truths about the universe and their place in it. This was where the other participants truly excelled. Silketh shared a vision of mathematical perfection, showing how all of reality could be understood as elegant equations in perfect harmony. Velthak demonstrated the beauty of strength in service of justice, revealing how power could be used to protect and nurture rather than dominate. Zarvex offered insights into the cyclical nature of wisdom and ignorance, showing how even the wisest beings must constantly choose between growth and stagnation. When Marcus's turn came, he didn't try to match their cosmic perspectives. Instead, he shared something simpler and more personal, his vision of what the Empire could become. He spoke about his months of training, and how Catharans who had initially seen him as inferior had come to respect his determination and unique capabilities. He talked about the messages Sarah had received from humans throughout the Empire, inspired to demand better for themselves. He described his growing understanding that diversity of thought and approach made civilizations stronger, not weaker. His vision was of an empire where beings were valued not for how closely they matched a single ideal, but for the unique contributions they could make. Where humans might serve alongside Catharans, not as servants or curiosities, but as partners bringing different strengths and perspectives to common challenges. It wasn't as philosophically sophisticated as the other visions, but it resonated with something in the audience. Marcus could hear murmurs of discussion throughout the arena, and several Catharans in the stands were showing skin patterns he'd learned indicated deep thought and consideration. When the trial of spirit concluded, the judges retreated to deliberate, while the participants waited in the center of the arena. The crowd had grown throughout the 3 days, and Marcus estimated that nearly 100,000 beings were now watching. After what felt like hours, Valthek the Wise returned to announce the results. His expression was unreadable, but his skin patterns showed what Marcus had learned indicated profound surprise. The championship trials test not only individual capability, but the potential for growth and service to the Empire, Valthek announced. The participants have all demonstrated remarkable abilities, but one has shown something we did not expect to see: the ability to achieve excellence through methods we had never considered. He paused, and the arena fell completely silent. The new champion of the Catharan Empire is Marcus Chen of Earth. The explosion of sound from the crowd was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. Cheers, shocked exclamations, and what sounded like arguments broke out simultaneously throughout the stands. On the arena floor, Marcus stood in stunned silence while the other participants approached him with expressions ranging from respect to bewilderment. Silketh reached him first. "You fought well, champion," she said, her skin showing patterns that indicated genuine admiration. "I do not understand how you achieved what you did, but I cannot deny that you achieved it." Velthak was next, his massive frame towering over Marcus. "I have been wrong about your species," he said simply. "I look forward to learning what other assumptions I need to reconsider." As the reality of his victory began to sink in, Marcus saw Princess Lyra Andiel approaching from the VIP section of the arena. Her expression was complex: pride, concern, and something that might have been relief, all mixed together. "Congratulations, champion," she said formally, but then leaned closer and spoke quietly. "Remember what I told you about forces that would oppose this change. Your real challenges may just be beginning." Before Marcus could respond, he was surrounded by arena officials, reporters, and dignitaries, all demanding his attention. But through the chaos, he caught sight of Zenkara, Vextara, and Dexhall in the stands. His trainers were showing the Catharan equivalent of proud grins, their skin patterns bright with satisfaction. As he was led from the arena for the formal coronation ceremony, Marcus realized that Princess Lyra Andiel was right. Winning the trials was just the beginning. Now he had to figure out how to actually serve as champion of an empire that had never imagined someone like him could hold such a position. But for the first time since leaving the asteroid mines, Marcus felt like he truly belonged somewhere. He was champion not in spite of being human, but because he was human. And that, he suspected, was going to change everything. Marcus Chen, former asteroid miner, would find out exactly what he was capable of when everything was on the line. The champion's quarters were unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined living in. Located in the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, they offered a view of the entire capital city stretching to the horizon. The rooms themselves were a perfect blend of Catharan aesthetics and practical functionality, with crystalline walls that could adjust their transparency and furnishings that adapted to the user's preferences. But as magnificent as the quarters were, Marcus found himself missing the simple functionality of his old room in the human district. Everything here was too perfect, too formal. It felt like living in a museum rather than a home. 3 days had passed since his coronation as champion, and Marcus was beginning to understand what Princess Lyra Andiel had meant about his real challenges just beginning. The formal ceremony had been impressive. Thousands of dignitaries from across the empire had attended, and Marcus had been presented with the traditional symbols of the champion's office, a crystalline amulet that marked his status, ceremonial armor that could actually provide significant protection, and access codes to imperial databases that contained the accumulated knowledge of 12 star systems. But the ceremony was the easy part. Now he had to figure out how to actually do the job. His first official duty had been to meet with the Imperial Council, the body of advisors who helped the emperor govern the empire. The meeting had been challenging. Elder Silvera, who had supported his right to attempt the trials, welcomed him warmly. But several other council members made their skepticism clear through the subtle skin patterns that Catharans used for private communication. They weren't openly hostile, but they clearly had doubts about whether a human could effectively serve in such an important position. The most vocal skeptic was Elder Morthek, an ancient Catharan who had served on the council for over a century. During the meeting, he had questioned whether Marcus truly understood the complexities of governing a multi-species empire. Champion Marcus, he had said, his skin showing patterns that indicated polite doubt. The trials test individual capability, but serving as champion requires understanding the delicate balance between dozens of different species with competing interests. How do you propose to mediate disputes between beings whose fundamental psychology you barely comprehend? It was a fair question, and Marcus had answered honestly. Elder Morthek, you're right that I don't fully understand all the species in the Empire yet, but I think that might actually be an advantage. I don't have preconceived notions about how different groups are supposed to act or what they're capable of. I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to ask questions that others might consider obvious. Elder Morthek's skin patterns had shifted to what Marcus was learning, indicated consideration of an unexpected point. Perhaps, he had said slowly, but learning requires time, and the Empire's challenges do not wait for anyone's education to be complete. As if to prove his point, Marcus's second week as champion brought his first major crisis. A trade dispute had erupted between the Vorthak Collective, a group of insectoid species that specialized in manufacturing, and the hegemony of Talshan, the aquatic beings who controlled most of the Empire's shipping lanes. Both sides were threatening to cease cooperation, which would cripple trade throughout the Outer Rim systems. The dispute centered on shipping rates and production quotas. But as Marcus studied the situation, he realized the real issue was deeper. The Vorthak felt that their contributions to the Empire were undervalued because their products were considered basic manufacturing rather than sophisticated technology. The Talshan believed that their control of the shipping infrastructure was being taken for granted, and they wanted more recognition for their strategic importance. Previous champions had handled such disputes through a combination of negotiation, threat, and occasionally demonstration of superior capability. But Marcus suspected that approach wouldn't work here because neither side was really fighting about shipping rates. They were fighting about respect and recognition. He requested individual meetings with representatives from both sides, something that apparently wasn't traditional. Champions usually heard disputes in formal sessions where all parties presented their cases simultaneously. But Marcus wanted to understand each side's perspective without the pressure of performing for their opponents. The Vorthak representative, Hive speaker Clixith, was unlike any being Marcus had encountered before. The insectoid's compound eyes tracked multiple objects simultaneously, while complex pheromone signals conveyed emotional undertones that Marcus could only partially interpret through his translation software. "Champion Marcus," Clixith began, "the Hive clusters have served the Empire faithfully for generations, producing the components that keep your starships functional and your cities powered. Yet when council meetings discuss valuable contributors to Imperial success, we are rarely mentioned. The Talshin control shipping and are praised for their strategic importance. The Catharans provide government and are honored for their wisdom. What recognition do the Vorthak receive for literally building the infrastructure that makes everything else possible?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I can understand why that would be frustrating. When you're providing the foundation that everything else depends on, being overlooked would feel like having your contributions dismissed." Exactly. Clixith's pheromone output spiked in what Marcus interpreted as surprise. Few beings understand this perspective. The meeting with the Talshin representative, flow speaker Nalesh, revealed a similar underlying issue. The aquatic being's form shifted constantly in ways that conveyed meaning Marcus was still learning to read, but her frustration was clear regardless of the communication method. "The shipping lanes require constant maintenance and protection," Nalesh explained. "Our people risk their lives in the void between stars to ensure that goods and communications reach their destinations safely. Yet recent council discussions about infrastructure improvements focus on planetary facilities and ignore the networks that connect them. We are treated as if our services are automatic rather than achieved through skill and sacrifice." After meeting with both sides separately, Marcus had an idea. Instead of trying to negotiate a solution to their stated dispute, he proposed something unprecedented: a formal recognition ceremony that would acknowledge the contributions of both species to the Empire's success. The proposal met with skepticism from the Imperial Council. "Champion Marcus," Elder Morthek said during the council session where he presented his idea, "while recognition ceremonies have their place, they do not resolve concrete trade disputes. The Vorthak and Tal Shen need practical solutions, not symbolic gestures." "I disagree, Elder," Marcus replied respectfully. "I think the practical dispute is actually a symptom of a deeper problem. Both species feel undervalued despite making essential contributions to the Empire. If we address that underlying issue, the specific trade disagreement becomes much easier to resolve." Princess Lyra Andiel, who attended council meetings as the Emperor's representative, spoke up in support. "The champion may have identified something important. We have been focused on managing the symptoms of interspecies tensions rather than addressing their root causes. The recognition ceremony was scheduled for the following month, giving Marcus time to coordinate with representatives from both species. But he also used that time to implement a more immediate solution to the trade dispute itself. Rather than imposing a settlement from above, he proposed that representatives from both species work together to develop new efficiency standards that would benefit everyone. The Vorthak would get recognition for their manufacturing expertise by helping to design better production protocols. The Tal Shen would be acknowledged for their shipping knowledge by leading the development of improved logistics systems. The approach worked better than anyone had expected. Working together on practical improvements, representatives from both species began to understand each other's contributions more clearly. The trade dispute resolved itself as they found ways to optimize their cooperation rather than competing for limited recognition. The success of Marcus's first major intervention as champion had an unexpected side effect. It attracted attention from beyond the Catharan Empire. The Zenari Republic, a neighboring galactic power, had been watching the Empire's internal developments with interest. The Zenari were a proud warrior culture that frequently challenged other civilizations to prove their strength and worthiness. They had a long tradition of issuing formal challenges to the champions of other powers, and Marcus's unprecedented victory in the trials made him an irresistible target. The challenge came in the form of an official communication delivered directly to the champion's quarters. Ambassador Krelltax of the Zenari Republic requested a formal audience to present what he described as an opportunity for the new champion to demonstrate the Empire's continued strength. The audience was held in the Imperial Throne Room, a vast crystalline chamber that could accommodate thousands of spectators. Emperor Sithral himself presided over the meeting, his ancient presence lending gravity to the proceedings. Marcus had only met the Emperor briefly during his coronation, but the aged Catharin's reputation for wisdom and strategic thinking was legendary throughout the Empire. Ambassador Krelltax was an imposing figure even by Zenari standards, nearly 3 meters tall, with metallic skin that shifted colors to indicate his mood, and 4 arms that ended in claws capable of crushing metal. When he spoke, his voice carried the harmonics that indicated he was speaking with the full authority of his government. Emperor Sithral, members of the Imperial Council, and Champion Marcus of the Catharin Empire, he began formally. The Zenari Republic has observed your recent, unusual, selection of a new champion with great interest. We have come to propose a test of this champion's worthiness to represent your empire in matters of galactic significance. Emperor Sithral's response was carefully neutral. The Zenari Republic is always welcome in our halls, Ambassador. What form does this proposed test take? A traditional challenge of worthiness, Krelltax announced. Our greatest warrior, Supreme Combatant Thalarix the Undefeated, will face your champion in single combat. The victor will earn significant advantages for their civilization in ongoing territorial and trade negotiations. Marcus felt a chill run through him. He had known this was coming. Princess Lyra Andiel had warned him that his victory would attract challenges from other powers, but he had hoped for more time to prepare. The challenge of worthiness was a Zenari tradition that went back thousands of years. It was a formal duel between champions that was considered binding by galactic law. The winner's civilization gained negotiating advantages that could affect the lives of billions of beings. Emperor Sithral looked at Marcus, his ancient eyes unreadable. Champion Marcus, as the Empire's representative, the decision of whether to accept this challenge rests with you. Marcus knew that refusing would be seen as weakness by the Zenari, and potentially by other galactic powers watching these developments. But accepting meant facing a warrior from a species that specialized in combat against an opponent who had never lost a formal challenge. I accept the challenge, Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly throughout the throne room. When and where will this combat take place? Ambassador Krelltax's skin shifted to colors that indicated satisfaction. Excellent. The combat will be held in 1 month's time at the neutral station of Crossroads 9. This will allow representatives from multiple civilizations to witness the outcome. As the formal audience concluded, Marcus realized that his first major success as champion had led directly to his greatest challenge yet. He had 1 month to prepare for a fight that would determine not just his own fate, but the Empire's standing among the galactic powers. The preparation for the challenge of worthiness was unlike anything Marcus had experienced, even during his training for the championship trials. Dex Hall returned as his primary combat instructor, but this time he was joined by Valthek the Wise and several other former champions who offered their expertise. The Zenari approach combat differently than we do, Valthek explained during one of their training sessions. They view it as an art form that expresses the warrior's entire philosophy of existence. Supreme Combatant Thalarix has been training since childhood for this kind of challenge. He is not just skilled, he is completely dedicated to the concept of victory through superior combat ability. Marcus spent hours studying recordings of Thalarix's previous challenges. The Zenari warrior was impressive in ways that made Marcus's success in the championship trials seem like a minor accomplishment. Thalarix moved with fluid grace despite his massive size, wielded weapons with perfect precision, and had never shown any sign of weakness or doubt in decades of combat. But as Marcus watched the recordings, he began to notice something interesting. Thalarix's opponents had all approached their challenges in similar ways. They had tried to match him in traditional combat skills. None of them had attempted to change the nature of the challenge itself. "What are the rules for a challenge of worthiness?" Marcus asked Valthek during one of their strategy sessions. "The rules are quite specific," the former champion replied. "Single combat, no technological assistance beyond basic weapons and armor. Fight continues until one participant yields or is unable to continue. The challenge is considered a test of the warrior's complete capabilities, physical, mental, and spiritual." "But what defines combat? Is it restricted to traditional fighting techniques?" Valthek's skin patterns shifted to indicate uncertainty. "The Zenari tradition emphasizes honor and direct confrontation. Why do you ask?" Marcus was beginning to form an idea, but he needed to research Zenari culture more thoroughly before committing to it. He spent the remaining weeks of preparation studying not just combat techniques, but Zenari philosophy, psychology, and cultural values. What he learned was fascinating. The Zenari valued strength and courage above all else, but their definition of these qualities was more complex than simple physical prowess. True strength, according to Zenari philosophy, included the wisdom to understand one's opponent and the courage to face challenges in ways that revealed one's deepest character. The day of the challenge arrived faster than Marcus would have liked. Crossroads 9 was a neutral space station that served as a meeting point for multiple civilizations, and representatives from dozens of different species had gathered to witness the combat. The main arena was smaller than the one where Marcus had competed in the championship trials, but its atmosphere was far more intense. Supreme Combatant Thalarix entered the arena first, his massive frame moving with the fluid precision that Marcus had studied in the recordings. The Zenari warrior's metallic skin shifted through colors that indicated confidence and anticipation, and when he acknowledged the crowd's cheers, it was with the casual grace of someone completely comfortable with being the center of attention. When Marcus entered the arena, the contrast was immediately obvious. He was smaller, obviously less physically imposing, and clearly nervous despite his attempts to appear calm. The crowd's reaction was more subdued, with many spectators apparently uncertain about what they were about to witness. The formal ceremonies before the combat were elaborate, involving speeches from ambassadors, ritual acknowledgments of the warrior's honor, and detailed recitation of the rules governing the challenge. Throughout it all, Marcus could feel the weight of expectation from the Empire's representatives in the audience. Finally, the moment arrived. Marcus and Thalarix stood facing each other in the center of the arena, with only a few meters separating them. The Zenari warrior had chosen traditional weapons, a pair of energy blades that hummed with contained power. Marcus had selected simpler equipment, a single metal staff, and basic protective armor. "Begin," the arena judge announced. Instead of attacking immediately, Marcus did something unexpected. He set his staff aside and raised his hands in what he hoped Thalarix would recognize as a gesture of peaceful intent. "Supreme Combatant Thalarix," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet arena. "Before we fight, I want to acknowledge your skill and honor. You have never been defeated because you are truly exceptional. I cannot match your combat abilities, and I will not insult either of us by pretending otherwise." Thalarix paused, his skin shifting to colors that indicated confusion. "You acknowledge your inferiority? Why then did you accept this challenge?" "Because," Marcus replied, "I think there's something more important than determining who is the better fighter. I think this challenge is an opportunity for both of our civilizations to learn something valuable." The crowd was murmuring now, clearly uncertain about what was happening. Formal challenges didn't typically include philosophical discussions. "I have studied your culture," Marcus continued, "and I've learned that Zenari warriors value not just strength but wisdom. You understand that true victory comes not from destroying one's opponent, but from achieving something greater than what either participant could accomplish alone." Thalarix's skin patterns continued to shift, indicating deep thought. "What are you proposing, human?" "I'm proposing that instead of fighting to see who is stronger, we demonstrate something that would be truly impressive to all the civilizations watching. That former enemies can choose to become allies when they recognize each other's worth." Marcus gestured toward the viewing areas where representatives from dozens of different species were watching. "Everyone here expects to see a fight. They expect one of us to be defeated and humiliated. But what if instead they saw two champions choosing cooperation over conflict? What if they saw that the strongest possible outcome is when different kinds of strength work together?" The arena was completely silent now. Even the judges seemed uncertain about how to proceed. Thalarix studied Marcus for a long moment. "You are either very wise or very foolish, human champion. Perhaps both. But you are correct that our civilizations could benefit more from cooperation than from one defeating the other." The Zenari warrior moved closer, and for a moment Marcus wondered if he had completely misjudged the situation. But instead of attacking, Thalarix extended one of his four hands in the traditional Zenari gesture of respect between equals. "I accept your proposal," Thalarix announced loudly enough for the entire arena to hear. "Let us demonstrate that true strength lies not in conquest, but in the wisdom to choose a better path." Marcus grasped the offered hand, and the arena erupted in confused discussion. Some spectators seemed angry at being denied the combat they had expected. Others appeared intrigued by this unprecedented development. The judges conferred for several minutes before announcing their decision. Since both champions had chosen not to fight, they declared the challenge a draw, an outcome that had never occurred in recorded Zenari history. But the real impact of Marcus's decision became clear over the following months. The Catharan Empire and the Zenari Republic began formal negotiations for the first cooperative treaty between their civilizations. Other galactic powers took notice of this unexpected development, and several began exploring similar agreements with the Empire. Marcus's approach to the challenge had demonstrated something that impressed beings throughout the galaxy. Sometimes the most powerful choice was the refusal to use power in expected ways. 6 months after becoming champion, Marcus stood once again in the arena where he had won the trials. But this time, he wasn't alone. Representatives from a dozen different species had gathered for the first Galactic Cooperation Summit, an event that grew directly out of his challenge with Thalarix. The summit was Princess Lyra Andiel's idea, but she had asked Marcus to serve as the primary host. "You've shown that different approaches to problems can lead to better solutions," she had told him. "This summit needs someone who can help beings see past their assumptions about each other." The assembled representatives were an impressive sight. Catharans, Zenari, Vorthak, Talshen, and 8 other species had sent their most skilled diplomats to discuss everything from trade agreements to mutual defense pacts. But more importantly, they were there to explore the possibility of a new kind of galactic civilization, one based on cooperation rather than competition. Marcus opened the summit with remarks that would later be quoted throughout the galaxy. 6 months ago, I stood in this arena as the first human to attempt the championship trials, he began. I thought I was fighting to prove that my species deserved respect. But I've learned that the real challenge wasn't proving human worth. It was demonstrating that our differences make us stronger when we choose to work together. He gestured toward the assembled representatives. Each of our civilizations has developed different strengths. The Catharans excel at long-term thinking and complex problem-solving. The Zenari understand courage and the importance of honor. The Vorthak have mastered efficient organization and manufacturing. The Tal Shin know how to maintain connections across vast distances. Humans, we seem to be good at finding new ways to look at old problems. The summit lasted for 2 weeks and resulted in the Crossroads Accord, a framework for ongoing cooperation between civilizations that had previously viewed each other with suspicion or indifference. The Accord established regular diplomatic exchanges, cooperative research projects, and joint response protocols for galaxy-wide challenges. But perhaps most importantly, it established the principle that diversity of perspective and approach was a strength to be cultivated rather than a problem to be managed. Marcus's role as champion evolved significantly after the summit. Instead of primarily serving as the Empire's representative in challenges and disputes, he became the first galactic cooperation coordinator, helping to facilitate relationships between civilizations throughout their region of space. The work was challenging and complex, but Marcus found it far more rewarding than anything he had done in the asteroid mines. He was using skills he hadn't known he possessed to solve problems that affected billions of beings across dozens of star systems. 1 year after becoming champion, Marcus received an unexpected visitor in his quarters. Sarah Kim, his friend from the early days on Cathara Prime, had requested a private meeting. "Marcus," she said, settling into one of the adaptive chairs with obvious delight, "I have news that I thought you'd want to hear directly from me." "Good news, I hope." "Very good news. The Empire has announced new policies regarding human integration. We're being offered educational opportunities, career advancement paths, and representation in local governance. More importantly, the policies are being extended to other minority species throughout the Empire." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction. This was what he had hoped for when he first requested to attempt the trials. "But that's not the most interesting part," Sarah continued. "3 other humans have formally requested to attempt the next championship trials. Apparently, your success has inspired others to believe that humans can compete at the highest levels." Marcus laughed. "I'm not sure whether to be proud or terrified for them." "Be proud," Sarah said firmly. "You've shown that being human doesn't mean accepting limitations that others impose on us. You've proven that our way of thinking has value in the galactic community. Most importantly, you've demonstrated that sometimes the biggest changes come from asking questions that everyone else thought were pointless." As Sarah left, Marcus walked to the window of his quarters and looked out over the sprawling city of Cathara Prime. In the distance, he could see the human district where he had lived during his first months on the planet. It looked different now, expanded, improved, and clearly no longer segregated from the rest of the city. Change was happening throughout the Empire and beyond, and Marcus knew that his victory in the trials had been just the beginning. The real work, building relationships, solving problems, and helping different civilizations understand each other, was ongoing and would probably continue for the rest of his life. But as he watched the traffic patterns of the city below, with beings from a dozen different species moving freely between districts that had once been separate, Marcus realized that the work was worth it. He had come to Cathara Prime as a displaced asteroid miner looking for a way to survive. He had become something he never could have imagined, a bridge between civilizations, helping to build a galaxy where diversity was valued and cooperation was possible. The girl who had made the request that changed everything, Princess Lyra Andiel, who had encouraged him to see beyond the limitations others assumed, had been right. One person refusing to accept the status quo could indeed change everything, and the changes were just beginning.